Yeah, and one of the big risks there is just with privilege escalation. If you can run code and you're on a you're on a Windows machine, there are thousands of ways to escalate a command from just being run as a normal user to being run as the system. So if you can run that code in any capacity, you can sort of bump yourself up outside of what was intended in a lot of ways.
So vulnerabilities you should be aware of. So 2023, there's been a lot of buzz with more than usual quantity of nasty 0 days. The 50% year-on-year increase in ransomware is in large part due to development of 0 days, according to Coven, head of the Cyber Threat Intelligence Chainalysis. A lot of folks have been calling this hot 0 day summer in June and July. We had 0 day vulnerabilities reported in products by Google and Microsoft, Apple. And again, we're going to see some statistics pretty soon about that and why we think that is. 57 vulnerabilities, 0 day vulnerabilities. That's a lot in 2023. So move it.
All right, so getting into the Move It hack. So this was one of the biggest hacks of 2023 and is one of the larger attacks in recent memory. This involved a ransomware group known as Clop, which is, they pop up here and there, but this was kind of their
claim to fame.
Yeah, it was their claim to fame. This jettisoned them into the news in a lot of ways. But essentially, this was beginning in late May, a SQL injection vulnerability with a file transfer solution known as Move It was discovered by the company itself. They were alerted to this by one of their clients that had said they were seeing some unusual activity on their servers. But they looked into this and found that there was a very serious 0 day that had already been exploited. As this last bullet point brings up, by the time that the 0 day was even discovered, there were already over 2,000 organizations that had had their data leaked at that point. So at day 0, there was already, upwards of 11 million people that had had some sort of information stolen from them.
Part of the reason why this one is so nasty is because it's a database vulnerability and because Move It is so prevalent in government and contracting.
Yeah, covers
even if you don't have the software stack yourself, a contractor or subcontractor might have it and might utilize it. And if they are sharing data and some of that data involves credentials, for example, maybe the impact is only, maybe it's only the contractors initially, but then because they got credentials and those credentials are privileged, they pivot from there. Yep. And we've seen that in a couple case studies is even though Move It wasn't in the organization itself, it was by proxy.
Yep, exactly. And so this was particularly, this affected both the cloud version of Move It, which is something that, may have been hosted through a service provider or a contractor, as well as the on-premise. So if you were running a server and you had Move It installed on there, that was also something that was vulnerable as long as they were public facing. Throughout this whole thing, this was not just one 0 day exploit. This was 3 separate 0 day exploits through this whole Move It event, essentially. And as Alex mentioned, one of the reasons this was so widespread is because this was something that was a service that was accredited to be used in pretty high security locations. The government used it. It was very widely used in legal offices and education, healthcare. You can see there's a huge list of organizations, very notable organizations in a lot of cases. But this was bad. And the day that this was discovered by the company, their suggestion outside of getting a patch out for some of their test servers was just to disable HTTP and HTTPS with any Move It server, which really would take it offline, but that also means that you no longer have access to that data. So if you needed something, if your daily tasks involved getting information that was in some way connected to a Move It server, it was either risk being infected or sit and wait and see what happens.
Kind of a wait and hope situation.
Right.
So in addition to that, we have 18 zero days exploited by this year from Apple. So attacking Apple, I should say. Folks, a lot of people still think that Apple is by default more secure, and I think a lot of people still think that because Microsoft is the biggest target, right? But it's kind of generated this fake sense of security with Apple products and even with Linux to some extent, that they're more secure. And they have a different model, so in some sense security vulnerabilities are harder to find, but they're getting targeted now.
Yep.
So we're seeing it. We're seeing plenty of attacks on Apple, specifically targeting Apple and iPhone, and we'll see also Google as well.
Yeah, and there have been several months throughout this year, last year, and the last couple of years where some of the top malware each month that is being seen in the wild is targeting Apple devices. Obviously, iOS and iPhones, those are a much larger target as there's a lot more devices out there. But when it comes to Apple, when it comes to Linux, there's not anything that intrinsically makes them more secure or protected against viruses or malware. It's just a matter of like attack surface. There's a lot more people that use Windows still, even today, and so that's obviously going to be the first target. But there's no reason that somebody wouldn't or couldn't develop malware for any sort of Apple or iOS or Unix device. So
and we see Windows in the government, so
yeah, exactly,
which is why it's such a big target. But we're seeing an increase in phone attacks, period. Right, so we're going to see the same thing with Android.
Yep.
Of course, we still have our Office exploits as well. This particular example, this was a document. It was specially crafted document that enables RCE, remote code execution, on the target's computer. In order for the exploit to succeed, they did need to open the file, which, we're always telling folks, don't open the file if you don't know who it's coming from. Always be suspicious, even if you do know who it's coming from, be suspicious. Because email is the #1 form of transmitting these things, right? From a social engineering standpoint. To date, the exploit has been used in highly targeted attacks against organizations. This one was Storm 0978, aka Romcom. And oftentimes they mention Ukraine or the Ukrainian World Congress, depending on the group. Google zero-day vulnerabilities, patch 46 bugs. One of them was critical. The critical one had to do with a remote control. They took control of a graphics rendering process that there was a vulnerability in one of the open source libraries, and it enabled full control of the phone for couple seconds, and they could do arbitrary things with it. So that was really, really bad.
Yep. And we're seeing a lot of, especially throughout this and just in general, a lot of patches and a lot of activity focusing on Google in 0 days. Largely because Chrome is such a widely used base as a browser. Chromium is what it's built off of, and Chromium is what things like Brave and Edge and obviously Chrome use. So these kind of very high profile, high criticality vulnerabilities, if there was a way, or if there was a chance that people could, build a website that in some way exploited this, that could be, catastrophic in a lot of cases. So we, especially as this kind of emphasis on fixing 0 days and everything, is under the magnifying glass, so to speak. We see a lot of activity with Chrome and with Google in particular.
Yeah, and you'll see later the statistics kind of reflect that. Just looking at it in a vacuum, seeing the 0 day statistics is, hey, why are these the targets? And then if you kind of take it to the next step, you can kind of see why. It's because browsers are everywhere. Everyone uses browsers to access the internet for everything, right? So of course they're going to target that. And then Barracuda. Everyone knows who Barracuda is. And UNC 4841 exploited a 0 day in their ESG product to target the U.S. government. FBI issued a flash alert, and it has reportedly been exploited since late 2022. So again, this is going to happen, and we got to just stay in the know, right? We got to know when this happens, and if we employ these tools, especially once the patch come out, make sure the patch is applied. But even prior to that, we got to be on high alert. Especially prior to that, we got to be on high alert. And then there's other top ones. Web server malicious URL directory traversal was actually the most exploited vulnerability, which actually surprised me a little bit. But then followed by Log4j, which is still out there, still causing headaches. And it's again, that patches have been out for forever. But as I've spoken to at length before, in some cases the vulnerability can get reintroduced because that Apache Log4j library is so widespread. It actually gets bundled. Vulnerable versions of it get bundled with new products.